Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
You ever sit at a dinner table and feel like you don't exist? Not like you're dead, not invisible either, just irrelevant? That was me this Easter Sunday. I was sitting at the far end of a long mahogany table in my parents' immaculately curated dining room, with its cream-colored wallpaper and gold-rimmed family portraits glaring down like judgmental ancestors. Across from me sat Lana, my younger sister, golden child, darling of the family and the universe apparently, laughing with that flawless performative charm she's mastered since she was in braces. She had just told a story about closing some deal in record time, and everyone was hanging on her every word like she'd solved climate change, cured cancer, and found Jesus all in the same week. My mother beamed like Lana had just handed her a second youth, while my dad nodded approvingly in that slow, dramatic way that made you feel like you were receiving a Medal of Honor. And there I was, 39, single with a career that never quite impressed them, holding a $5 bottle of Pinot that I knew they'd quietly mock the second I left the room. It wasn't that I hated my family. No, hate's too clean of a word. What I felt was more like exhaustion mixed with chronic disappointment, like running a marathon you never signed up for, only to watch someone else take your medal at the finish line while you're still trying to untie your sneakers. Lana had always been the one they rooted for. When she got a C in high school, Mom said it was because the teacher didn't like strong-willed girls. When I got an A-, I was asked why I didn't aim higher. When she crashed Dad's Lexus into a fire hydrant at 17, they called it a learning moment. When I turned down a six-figure offer from a consulting firm because it went against my values, they called me ungrateful and immature. It wasn't favoritism, they'd say. It was just that Lana had drive, while I was too emotional, too intense, too much. Dinner smelled like roasted lamb, rosemary, and betrayal. My dad carved the meat with that same knife he's had since the 80s. The one he claims is still sharper than any damn thing you'll find at Williams-Sonoma, and every slice felt like a metaphor. I watched him place a thick, juicy piece on Lana's plate first, always first, then offer it around the table like we were all guests at her party. And then, just as I was about to stab another scoop of mashed potatoes onto my plate and bury my feelings in starch, it happened. He reached into his blazer pocket like a magician about to pull a rabbit out of a top hat and held up a velvet box, sleek, black, unmistakably expensive. The table quieted. My mom's eyes sparkled like she already knew the punchline, and Lana just looked confused for half a second before breaking into that polished pageant smile. "Your mother and I," Dad said, looking directly at her, "have watched you work your ass off these past few years. The way you handled that Denver expansion? Hell, that was beyond impressive." I took a breath but didn't speak. He continued, "You earned this. We bought you the condo on Lakeview, not a rental. It's yours, fully paid. Keys are in the box." He opened the lid, revealing 2 silver keys on a gold key ring. Lana gasped, covered her mouth like she hadn't seen it coming, even though she probably helped pick out the damn countertops. Everyone erupted in applause. Even Aunt Margie clapped. And she didn't even know what a Denver expansion was. Someone raised a toast. There were hugs and champagne and pride swelling so thick in the room you could choke on it. Meanwhile, I sat still, my wine untouched, my fork hovering midair like it had forgotten its job. My mother finally looked at me, not apologetically, not lovingly, but with that pitying tilt of the head she saved for charity cases. "Maybe one day you'll understand, Holly," she said, smiling like she'd just given me a consolation prize. "Lana's earned this." I nodded calmly, smiled even, because I had come prepared. No, I didn't know about the condo, but I knew this day would come in some form. A day when they would once again crown Lana the heir to the family empire, and pretend like I never built the damn foundation. So I waited, reached slowly into my purse, and pulled out an envelope. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a fit or make a scene. I just placed the envelope quietly beside my father's wine glass and said, "Since we're handing things out today, I thought I'd bring something too." He glanced at it like it was a bill from the IRS. Lana narrowed her eyes, confused. My mother leaned forward slightly, sensing something was off. "What's that?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion and that familiar dread she used to get when I spoke up too much as a child. I just smiled, leaned back in my chair, and said, "You should probably read it now, before dessert." I knew what was in that envelope. I knew what it would do, and I had waited years for this moment. The moment I placed that envelope on the table, the entire atmosphere shifted in a way that's hard to put into words. Like the room forgot how to breathe for just a second. Like someone had cracked a window in the middle of a storm, and nobody knew whether to shut it or jump out. My father looked at it like he was trying to decode whether this was a thank you card or a threat. But it was my mother's expression that really told the story. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the corners of her lips tightened just enough to signal that instinctive maternal radar had picked up something she didn't like. Lana, meanwhile, was still basking in the afterglow of her grand reward, twirling those shiny new keys in her fingers like a baton, flashing that infuriatingly fake humility that made people think she was grounded and sweet, when in reality she was about as selfless as a CEO cutting pensions for profit. They didn't open the envelope right away. That was the interesting part. They were so used to me being quiet, to me swallowing things like a good soldier, so used to dismissing anything I brought to the table, whether it was my career, my opinions, or my pain, that even when I interrupted their golden moment, they still thought it was something harmless. Maybe a poem, maybe a bitter joke, maybe a list of resolutions like I'd written one year, when Lana got promoted and they gave her a surprise party, while I got a store-bought card and a slice of leftover cake. They weren't ready, not even close. Dad leaned back in his chair and chuckled, trying to diffuse the tension like it was just another Sunday, and nothing explosive was lurking inside a plain white envelope. "Well," he said, lifting his wine glass, "unless it's a check, I think your sister wins this round." He was trying to be charming, the way men do when they know they've made a choice and don't want to own the consequences. I smiled again, not because it was funny, but because I'd predicted that line nearly word for word. Lana gave a small laugh too, that smug little sound she made when she thought she was being graceful in victory, not realizing she was about to lose more than just her moment. "I'm serious," I said, my tone even, my face calm, almost disturbingly so. "I want you to read it. Now." I think that's when something flickered in Lana's eyes. Just a flicker, like a shadow crossing over a sunny wall. But it was enough to tell me that part of her remembered. She didn't know exactly what I'd written, but she knew enough of the past to feel the first cold fingers of dread sliding up her spine. My mother reached for the envelope, perhaps thinking she could mediate whatever passive-aggressive monologue she assumed I had scrawled inside, and she opened it with careful fingers, pulling out the single folded page, cream paper with blue ink, handwritten. The first few lines were polite, intentionally polite. They lulled the reader into a false sense of civility, opening with gratitude for the meal, acknowledgement of Lana's success, because I knew they would be suspicious of anything direct, defensive, or angry. But then came the pivot. About halfway down the page, I reminded them, not bitterly, not accusingly, just factually, of the year I spent helping build the logistics model for the Denver branch before it even had a name, while Lana was still finishing her last semester at college. I noted how I worked overtime every weekend, unpaid, designing workflow plans, supply chain diagrams, negotiating vendor contracts, all under the umbrella of family help. Because back then, I thought being part of something meant not needing credit. I had the emails, the drafts, the timelines, and I had attached copies to each sentence in my letter, flagged with dates and subjects, evidence that every foundational piece of what later became Lana's expansion was constructed with my time, my brain, and my hands. But then I took it further. I described how, months later, when I was passed over for the regional operations role, without explanation, my father called me into his office, Not to thank me, not to explain, but to say that some people are meant to support, not lead, and that Lana has the charm to take things public, while you have the heart to stay behind the scenes. He thought he was being wise, philosophical, generous even, but it was a cut dressed in poetry. My mother stopped reading halfway through. Her hands trembled just slightly. She passed the page to my father, who read it faster, his jaw tightening with every line. And then, finally, to Lana, who scanned it quickly, then once more slowly, her lips parting just a little as she began to realize this wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a moment. This was a reckoning. The silence was thick, uncomfortable, as if someone had turned down the volume on reality itself. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, my father cleared his throat, set the page down, and said, "This is very one-sided, Holly. This isn't how things happened." My mother nodded too quickly. "Yes, it's your version of the past. We all remember it differently." And then Lana, always the quick one, always the manipulator in heels, leaned forward and said, "This is ridiculous. You never wanted that role. You said you were too burned out. You said it was beneath you." I looked her dead in the eye. "No, I said I was burned out because I was working 60 hours a week for free while you were out doing tequila shots with your sorority. I said it was beneath me after you took credit for everything I built." She flinched at that, barely, but I saw it. That's when I said it, the sentence that cut through the room like a scalpel dipped in ice. "Check the dates. I made copies. You'll find the original emails, contracts, and outlines in your inboxes within the hour. I blind copied your legal counsel. Happy Easter." I could see the gears turning, their little world, this carefully maintained illusion of merit and reward, of Lana as the chosen one, and me as the disappointment, starting to splinter. They didn't understand it yet, but the surface had cracked, and everything they thought was secure was about to sink. There's a very specific kind of silence that falls over a room when the air gets too heavy with truth that's been buried under years of polished performances, half smiles, and carefully curated family dynamics. It's not the silence of peace, nor the awkward hush after someone's had too much to drink and brought up politics. It's the deadening, gravity-thick pause of realization when people understand that something they've ignored for too long is about to detonate, and there's no going back once it does. That was the silence that wrapped around the dining room the moment my father's eyes finished scanning the last lines of my letter, his hand gripping the paper with just enough tension to betray what his face was trying desperately to conceal. He didn't say a word at first. Instead, he folded the page, slowly and deliberately, placing it on the table like it was just another napkin to be cleared away. And when he finally lifted his gaze toward me, there was something new in his eyes, something beyond disappointment or confusion or anger. It was recognition, maybe the first real moment in my life where I saw, in his face, the acknowledgement that I wasn't playing games anymore, that I had stepped into the ring not as a daughter pleading for fairness, but as a witness holding a mirror up to the entire family's illusion. But he still couldn't help himself, even now when the facts were staring him down. When the narrative he'd built around Lana's success had cracks in every corner, he reached for the only armor he had left: control. "I think," he said slowly and with that condescending calm he reserved for boardrooms and tantrum-prone clients, "that if you wanted to have a conversation about all this, you could have done it privately." That was the pivot. Minimize the moment. Shift the blame to the way I exposed the truth rather than the truth itself. As if the timing of my revelation somehow invalidated the years of silence that preceded it. But I didn't flinch. "Privately," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a challenge. "You mean like all those closed-door decisions where I was never invited? Like the surprise promotions, the title changes, the bonuses sent behind my back? You mean private, like the 3 years I worked unpaid, because Mom said we were building something as a family, and then suddenly Lana's the only one on the payroll?" My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was steady, surgical, and sharp. No, Dad, you don't get privacy anymore. You get accountability. Lana, who had gone from smug to stiff-backed in under 10 minutes, finally broke the pretense and leaned in across the table, her voice coated in that glossy, performative compassion she always used when she was cornered. Holly, I don't know why you're doing this. This isn't you. You've always said you didn't want the spotlight. You were always the quiet one, the one who didn't care about recognition. What's changed? It was such a practice line that it almost worked. Almost. But I'd had years to build my resolve, to scrape together every discarded piece of my worth from the corners they'd swept it into. And I wasn't going to be gaslit back into silence by a woman who once told our parents I'd stolen her presentation slides when, in fact, I'd written every word of them. What's changed, I said, not breaking eye contact, is that I finally realized you never stopped lying about me, even when you didn't have to. I turned toward our mother, whose hands were now clutching a linen napkin, like it could somehow absorb the fallout. You taught us to value family over everything else, but only when it was convenient for Lana. I was family when I worked for free. I was family when I sacrificed my weekends, my health, and my own job offers to keep this business from collapsing in the early years. But I stopped being family the moment I asked to be treated as an equal. That's when you shut the door. That's when you stopped listening. The impact was slow, like thawing ice. Everyone in the room reacting at different speeds, some in denial, others in quiet, rattled reflection. Aunt Margie looked from me to my father, clearly unsure whether she was supposed to intervene or pretend to need the restroom. My cousin Theo, who had always been the quiet observer in the family circus, shifted in his seat like he'd just realized this Easter brunch was about to go down as the kind of event that gets whispered about for years at funerals and weddings. And then, like a lightning bolt in the middle of that tension, I dropped the next match into the fire. "Read it out loud," I said. My father blinked. "Excuse me?" "Read the letter out loud," I repeated. "If you think it's so unfair, if you think it's all my version, then read it, out loud, to everyone." He hesitated. Of course he did. Because deep down, even if he didn't agree with me, especially if he didn't, he knew that saying the words aloud would force him to confront the grotesque symmetry of it all, the way they had built Lana's pedestal with the bricks of my silence. He knew that if he read my words aloud, they would take shape, gain volume, become undeniable. He didn't do it. Instead, my mother reached for the letter again, and in a surprisingly steady voice, began to read. Not dramatically, not defiantly, just plainly, each word like a pebble dropping into still water. The room listened, really listened, and with every sentence, the expressions shifted. Some grew pale, others turned red. Lana's jaw tensed. My father rubbed his forehead like he had a headache made of regret and missed warnings. The final paragraph was the one I'd labored over the most, where I told them I wasn't asking for their apology, their money, or their approval. What I wanted was something far more dangerous to people like them: the truth, the acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the betrayal, that the story they'd told themselves about who contributed what was a lie, and that Lana's condo, her job title, her applause, all of it, had been funded by my erasure. By the time my mother finished reading, you could feel the shift. Not a revolution, not a scream, but something quieter and more permanent. The room was no longer just a setting for celebration. It had become a courtroom, and the verdict, while unspoken, had already started to form in everyone's eyes. I didn't stand up. I didn't storm out. I just sat there letting it all settle, knowing that this was only the beginning. Because truth, once spoken out loud, doesn't disappear. It echoes, it multiplies. It seeps into the cracks of every memory and waits, patient and precise, for the rest of the fallout to arrive. There's something fascinating, almost surgical, about the way people shift their body language when their version of reality begins to collapse in front of them. Not with violence, not with screaming or throwing plates like you'd see in a cheap drama, but in these subtle, involuntary betrayals of posture and glance. The way shoulders draw in, the way eye contact suddenly becomes too sharp or completely absent, the way a mother clutches her napkin so tightly it could be wrung out like an accusation, and the way a father who's always prided himself on his authority begins blinking too often, rubbing the bridge of his nose like that one simple gesture can wipe away decades of favoritism disguised as wisdom. That was the room I sat in, motionless, as my mother finished reading my letter out loud, each word echoing slightly against the crystal glasses and untouched dessert plates, each sentence reshaping the family hierarchy that had been so carefully, so cruelly maintained. But the most satisfying unraveling of all, the one I'd prepared for the longest and timed with deliberate cruelty, was watching Lana realize that the keys dangling from her manicured fingers weren't just a gift from loving parents, but a trophy purchased with the labor she never acknowledged, with credit she never earned, and with a lie that was finally and publicly collapsing beneath her designer heels. She didn't speak immediately, which surprised me. For someone who's always had a counterpoint, a practiced deflection, some cute little anecdote to soften any blow, she just sat there, lips parted slightly, eyes scanning the room as if trying to find a single person who still believed she was untouchable. And yet, even then, even as the weight of exposure began to drag the corners of her perfect facade down into something closer to human, my father still tried to rescue her. Not out of compassion, I don't think, but out of habit. The same way someone might reflexively reach to stop a vase from falling, even after realizing it's already cracked. Holly Tsang, he began, his voice low and flat. You have every right to your feelings, but this isn't how families work things out. We don't ambush each other, we talk, we compromise, we move forward. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so pathetic, because here was a man who once said to my face that my sister was born for leadership, while I was better suited to back-end roles, and now he wanted to talk about fairness and dialogue? I tried that, I replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. I tried talking, I tried asking for a seat at the table, I tried suggesting my name be included in the proposal I drafted. I tried reminding you both, gently at first, and then directly, that I had experience, that I had skills, that I had earned a chance. But every time, you told me the same thing. It wasn't the right time, or it would send the wrong message, or that Lana just had the right image. So I stopped asking, and I started keeping records. I turned toward Lana then, who had finally regained enough composure to push her chair back just slightly, arms crossed in that defensive pose she used to adopt in high school when she got caught lying but didn't want to admit fault. That condo, I said, nodding toward the keys she still held like a deadweight. It's not a reward for your brilliance. It's hush money, whether you realize it or not. Mom and Dad didn't give you that because you earned it. They gave it to you because they've been covering for you for years, pretending you were the architect of something I built brick by brick, and this condo is their last desperate attempt to keep the illusion alive. She opened her mouth then, and for a split second, I could see the wheels turning. She was going to deny it. Of course she was, that's what she did. But what came out wasn't a denial. It was worse. It was the truth slipping through before she could catch it. I didn't know you still had those files, she said, and the instant the words were out, her face changed, like she'd just realized she'd confessed to more than she intended. The room froze again. My mother inhaled sharply. My father looked like someone had slapped him with his own logic. That was it, the moment it all broke. Not because of my letter, not because of the emails or the receipts, but because Lana, the star, the favorite, the one they bet everything on, had just admitted in front of everyone that she knew what she did, and she didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She just sat there, looking like a cornered animal who'd realized the cage was her own making. I copied everything before I left the company, I said. Every spreadsheet, every workflow, every client proposal with my initials at the bottom and your name at the top. I didn't say anything back then because I thought maybe I was being petty. Maybe I just needed to let it go, but then you got promoted again. Then you got the speaking gigs? Then I saw your face on that Forbes list with a quote you lifted straight out of my mouth, and I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft, repeated, systematic, and protected by two people who were too proud to admit they'd backed the wrong daughter. I leaned back then, letting the silence do what it needed to do, watching the old narrative die a slow, awkward death in the middle of a pastel-colored dining room that had once felt like a mausoleum for my ambition. No one reached for dessert. No one toasted anything. The celebration had rotted. The wine turned sour in their glasses, and all that remained was the undeniable presence of consequence. And then, just as my father began to open his mouth again, probably to shift the blame or suggest we revisit the past constructively, I decided to close that door completely. By the way, I said, standing up, collecting my purse, calm as ever, there's a lawyer watching this right now. Not here, of course, but they've got all the documentation. This isn't about suing or blowing things up, yet, but I wanted you to know that this time I'm not alone, and this time there's a record. With that, I turned toward the hallway. Behind me, no one followed. No one called my name, because they finally understood what I'd become. Not the bitter sister, not the forgotten daughter, not even the victim. I was the witness. And worse, for them, I was finally ready to speak. The hallway outside my parents' dining room had always been a sort of in-between place, a narrow stretch lined with old family photos and decorative sconce lights that flickered whenever someone walked too quickly past them. A quiet corridor of curated memories designed to project a certain type of life, happy, successful, cohesive. I remember staring at those same photos as a child, memorizing the sequence, the black and white one of my parents' engagement, the framed shot of Lana at her Sweet 16 party, in a sequin dress that probably cost more than my college textbooks, and the posed Christmas portrait from the year we all pretended nothing was wrong, even though it was the year I got laid off from a project I had created because Lana had told the board I wasn't adaptable to growth culture. I used to stand in that hallway and wonder how people could walk past lies and call them legacy. But on that day, as I made my way toward the front door, something shifted deep inside me, something like release. Not the soft, melodramatic kind you see in movies, but the kind that comes with a cost, the kind that changes how you walk through the world. The house was silent behind me. I could still feel the weight of the moment I'd left hanging in the dining room, like a glass ornament suspended midair just before it shatters. And I knew, without needing to look back, that no one had moved yet. They were probably still sitting in stunned disbelief, too proud to chase after me and too exposed to pretend nothing had happened. And I found a certain poetic satisfaction in knowing I'd finally disrupted the machine they'd all worked so hard to keep humming. My silence had been their oil, and I had taken it away. I stepped outside into the soft, early evening air, the sun beginning to slide beneath the tree line in that golden hour way that always makes everything look more honest than it really is. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I wasn't storming out or escaping humiliation or reacting to another backhanded compliment hidden behind a polite toast. I was simply leaving, and the finality of that movement felt like its own kind of victory. I knew they'd talk eventually, maybe in hushed voices over cold coffee or loud arguments that turned into character assassinations, with Lana playing the victim, Dad defending his decision-making like he always did when cornered, and Mom suggesting therapy not because she believed in it, but because it would make her feel like she was doing something productive. But none of it would undo what had happened. The truth, once spoken, doesn't fade, it stains. As I reached my car, I checked my phone, not for missed calls, because I knew there wouldn't be any, but to see the message I'd sent an hour before dinner began. The one addressed to the company's board of directors marked for review, with every attachment, timestamp, and legal acknowledgement included. I didn't do it out of spite or ambition. I wasn't seeking revenge in the way people think of it, with fire and fury. What I wanted was accountability. What I demanded was to no longer be written out of my own history, to no longer allow other people's cowardice to rewrite the parts of the story where I did the work, bore the weight, and was erased simply because I didn't smile the right way at donor events or schmooze well over cocktails. Back inside that house, my family would be cycling through damage control, denial, and probably some very long, uncomfortable silences. I imagined Lana pacing, fingers clenching the keys, to her shiny new condo like they were burning holes into her skin, and part of me hoped she'd finally feel the weight of what those keys truly represented. Opportunity stolen, credit misassigned, success built on the bones of someone else's labor. Maybe she'd ignore it, maybe she'd play innocent, but maybe, just maybe, some small part of her would finally understand that there's a difference between winning and deserving to win, and that the applause she'd chased her whole life was as hollow as the ethics behind it. The board might respond, they might not. The legal outcome wasn't really the point, though I wouldn't mind if it forced some uncomfortable questions to be asked in rooms where my name had never been invited before. But I hadn't walked into Easter dinner planning to take down a company, or sue my parents, or destroy my sister's career. What I wanted, more than anything, was to look each of them in the eye and make them say out loud what they had always whispered to each other, that they valued loyalty when it came from me, but only when it came without expectations, that they loved me, but only when I knew my place. And now, as I sat behind the wheel, engine humming softly, I realized something that hit harder than I expected. It wasn't that they didn't love me. It was that their love came with terms, unspoken rules, conditions I never agreed to, but somehow was always punished for violating. Their love wasn't unconditional, it was transactional, awarded only when I played the role they'd assigned me, the dependable older daughter, the one who doesn't make waves, who stays out of the spotlight, who claps the loudest from the wings. But I was done performing. I had rewritten the script, and for the first time, I was the one holding the pen. As I pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that closure doesn't come from someone else admitting they were wrong. It comes from knowing you were right to speak, even if your voice shakes, even if your family never forgives you for it. The truth costs something, and I had paid in silence long enough. So I whispered it to myself, not for them, not for some future court or reconciliation, but just for me, as the trees blurred past, as the last rays of sunlight danced on the windshield, and the keys in my purse jingled softly like a reminder of something broken, finally being put to rest. "Happy Easter," I said out loud, and let the silence answer back.